When the Legends Die, Chapter 19. The agents said they would make a farmer out of him yet, and that spring they tried. He learned readily enough to harness a team of work horses, and he learned how to hitch the team to a plow. They showed him how to hold the plow handles and turn a furrow. Then they took him to a field that was soon to be planted with corn and set him to work. They hoped to make a plowboy out of him. But plowing seemed stupid to him. Why should anyone rip up the grass, even if it was sparse grass, and make the earth grow something else? If left to itself, the earth would grow grass and many other good things. When you plowed up the grass, and you were making the earth into something it did not want to be. And plowing one furrow after another, side by side, was like walking in a room if you walked only on one board, then on the next, and the next, and the next. You went nowhere. The world was a big place. Why should you stay in one little field and make all your footsteps side by side? The horses knew what to do. They followed each furrow to the end, then turned and followed the next furrow back again. And all he had to do was to hold the plow handles and keep the plowshare in the ground at an even depth. But he kept thinking of how senseless it all was, and he let the plowshare drift up and down and make a deep furrow here, a shallow furrow there, and no furrow at all in many places. Neil Swanson came and looked. "Maybe you could do a worse job if you tried," he said, "but I doubt it." He took the team and showed Thomas Blackpool how to hold the plow handles steady and turn a clean, uniform furrow. He plowed to the end of the field and back, Thomas walking beside him. "Nothing to it," Neil said. "Now you do it." And while Neil watched, Thomas turned a perfect furrow. Neil said, "That's it. All you have to do is keep a steady hand and pay attention." He went back to the barns, and Thomas plowed just as he had before, deep and shallow, and no furrow at all. After 2 weeks, Neil said, "We can't plant corn in a field like that." He brought another boy and set him to plowing the field all over again, and he took Thomas back to the cow barn. "Since you won't learn to plow," he said, "you'll have to clean the cow barn and learn to milk." Thomas knew that this was punishment for not becoming a good plowboy, but punishment no longer mattered. The smell of the cow barn nauseated him, but he cleaned it. The smell of warm milk made him feel sick, but he learned to milk a cow. He had to work in the cow barn only a few hours a day, morning and evening. In a few more weeks, most of his classes ended. For the summer, he became a herd boy. After the morning milking and the barn cleaning, he took the cows to pasture on the grass 2 miles from the barns. He stayed with the cows, seeing that they did not wander too far until late afternoon. Then he brought them back and helped with the evening milking. For a herd horse, he had a straight-holded old nag and a saw-toothed backbone. He hated the horse and its limping gait, which kept his bottom raw, but he learned to ride after a fashion. In the long hours in the open, even though it was a land of sagebrush, cactus, and scattered grass, were a relief from the cow barn. The open country smelled clean, even when the wind blew and the dust rose with its acrid, alkaline smell. There was sunshine, there was sky, there was distance and a degree of freedom. He didn't mind being a herd boy. Then it was June, and the cornfields were green. The cows, with only sparse grass to eat, smelled the corn, and one afternoon when Thomas was watching a meadowlark's nest, the whole herd broke through a fence and got into a field of corn. It was an hour before he could get them out again, and that night 3 of the cows were sick from eating green corn. Neil Swanson found out what had happened, and as punishment he kept Thomas at the barns all day and put another boy out as cowherd. When he had been punished in this way for 2 weeks, Neil Swanson said, "You should have learned your lesson by now. We'll see if you can herd the horses." So, though he still had to help clean the cow barns and milk the cows morning and night, he was sent out for the day with the horse herd. The horses were pastured 5 miles from the barns and well away from the cornfields. Half the horses in the herd were still unbroken, and after the first week or so, Thomas wondered what it would be like to ride an unbroken horse. So he took a rope with him when he took the horses out to their pasture land, and that afternoon he roped a 2-year colt and got on its back and tried to ride it. He was thrown after the first 2 jumps. He caught the colt and tried again. He was thrown as before, and that time he landed on a bed of cactus. He spent the rest of the afternoon pulling out cactus thorns, but the next day he caught another colt and tried to ride again. It was a tamer colt. He rode it for several minutes before it bucked him off. For 2 weeks he tried to ride the colts in the herd, and he found that he could stay on 3 of the tamer ones. He began to learn how to ride. Then one afternoon, trying to get the rope on a particularly wild buckskin, he rode it into a dry creek bed, and there, in loose sand, hock deep on the horse, he looped the rope around its nose, got its back, and rode it to a standstill. He had discovered something. No horse can be a vicious bucker in deep sand. After that, when he wanted to ride a horse that was too wild to ride on hard ground, he drove it into the creek bed and rode it there in the sand. He learned that each horse had its own rhythm, not only in its walk and trot and lope, but in the way it bucks and pitches. He found that if he rode the horse with its own rhythm, and if he gripped with his knees and thighs and kept his sense of balance, he could ride every horse in the herd in the sand. When he had ridden them all, he looped a rope around the horse's belly and made a kind of surcingle to which he could hold and help keep his balance. With the rope, he found that he could ride some of the unbroken horses out on the hard flats. He still was thrown from time to time, but began to show a sense of mastery, something he hadn't known since the day he stood in front of the burned lodge on Bald Mountain, and knew that everything that had ever mattered to him was gone. One afternoon, toward the end of August, he was riding a particularly mean 2-year-old pinto when Benny Grayback rode out to the grazing ground. He was so intent on riding the pinto that he rode it to a standstill before he knew that Benny was there watching. He slid off the exhausted horse, removed the surcingle and nose rein, and waited for Benny to speak. Benny glared at him and asked, "How long this been going on?" Thomas didn't know what to answer. He said, "I rode till he stopped bucking. I don't know how long." "How long you been riding the colts?" Thomas shrugged. "You're supposed to let them graze, not ride them and make them thin. Neil Swanson says the horses are all too thin. I came to find out why." "The grass is poor," Thomas said. "You give them no time to eat what grass there is," Benny said sharply. "I was taming them to ride." "When they are needed, they will be tamed," Benny said, "by those who know how to break horses." Which was true. Each year the horses were broken to harness or the saddle, usually in the spring. They were driven into the breaking pen, roped, choked, and water-starved until they could be saddled and harnessed. If they still had the strength to fight, they were beaten and choked again, until there was no fight in them. In the old days, the people had respected their horses, tamed them. But the old days were gone. Now they broke the horses, broke their spirit. "Come," Benny Grayback ordered, "bring the horses." Thomas Blackbull caught his listless herd of horses and gathered the herd, and he and Benny took them back to the agency. Thomas penned them, and Benny went to the barn and talked to Neil Swanson. Then Thomas went to the barn, and Neil shook his head and said, "You never learn, do you? If there are 100 ways to do a thing right and one way to do it wrong, you always find the one wrong way." He shook his head. "Lickings do no good. Nothing does any good. Well, classes start next week. Then you'll be out of my hair till it's time to pick corn. Go on, over to the cow barn and get to work." And that was the end of Thomas Blackbull's horse herding. Classes started again, and because he seemed useless at any other craft, they sent him back to Ed Porter to plait rawhide and horsehair into quirts and riatas and bridles and reins. He still worked morning and evening in the cow barn, and when the corn was ripe, he helped shuck corn. Then it was winter, and when the winter began to thin away, Neil Swanson said, "It's almost lambing season," and Benny Grayback said, "Albert Left Hand needs a helper." Neil said, "Why not? That boy isn't good for anything else. He might make a sheep herder." The agent said, "It's worth a try."